Hey, Valentina, welcome to the show.
Hey, Brittany, thanks for having me.
I am very excited to have you on. I have been subscribed to your newsletter for probably the longest of any other femtech startup, honestly.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Not only do I love your newsletter because it's like great branding and it's a great product, but you always have literally the most interesting articles. Like, why is my poop weird during my period? Or like things that I'm like, yeah, why is it? Thank you. Thank you for writing this article. Like, nobody else, I have never read it before. So you make like really common questions accessible.
That's the entire point of our female health content library, Vitos, which you can find on our website. And I guess now's the time for a shout out to one of our team members, Liv Casano. She is the editor of Vitos, and she's the person who sends out all of the newsletters that you love. She's incredible. Such
Mad
a
love to her. Don't lose her. She's amazing.
no voice to be part of the female hot conversation. And the conversations that we have in the office would just seem so strange to any outside party. Like, you know 15 minutes pass by and someone's like, my period blood today is a funky color. Does anyone know why? Oh, let's write an article about that. Or you know vaginal discharge. What are all of the different forms and shapes and scents of vaginal discharge? Let's write an article about that. So that's very much, pioneered by Liv from our team.
I love it. That's the kind of team I like to work on. So that's awesome. Well, our listeners love to learn more about our guests, especially like their background. Where are you from? What did you study? Did you have a career before this? And like, how did you end up in this?
Thank you for asking. So I'm from Bulgaria. I was born in Bulgaria, and I went to receive my bachelor's and my master's in the UK. So that's how I first moved to London. I unfortunately don't have a background in anything related to biology or medicine or STEM. I really wish I did. Would have been really helpful for what I'm doing right now. Um, I instead studied law and economics, which actually was really helpful because it gave me this like systems thinking, which I could apply to various layers of the company. And I had a career before I started the company, started off in think tanks and policy work, then transitioned into journalism, and then from journalism went into early stage startups through two accelerators, Techstars and Founders Factory. And that's when I was first introduced to the world of entrepreneurship and really loved the innovation that would come out of it, the autonomy that you had in creating your own culture, your own products, and just trying things a different way, breaking dogmas.
I love it. So you felt like it was your tribe. You met other founders and you were like, you're my people. Do you feel like
Yeah,
that? Yeah.
yeah. There's few other industries in which you can have so much freedom of thought.
Mhm.
Everyone's constantly questioning everything. People are very curious, and I'm naturally drawn to environments like this. So I really love discovering the world of entrepreneurship. Yeah.
Especially if you're like a journalist, right? Like you're questioning things. You're like, what's the real story here? What's going on? So yeah, I can totally see that. For me, it was my background is in science. I'm wearing my STEMinist sweatshirt today, right? So I'm a geneticist. So like, yeah, my education was based on like ask questions, run a pilot experiment, do an MVP, get feedback, throw your thoughts out the window because turns out they were crap. The data says actually like this is the right way. So I really think it's interesting all the different routes people can take to get into entrepreneurship. Like you don't need an MBA to be an entrepreneur. You could literally be a doctor, scientist, journalist, college dropout, like anything essentially. Did you notice any femtech companies and did you think like that was something you wanted to get into right away or how did you get into it?
Not really. So when I first had the idea for the company, it was early 2017, and femtech wasn't such a big thing yet. It was about to become. I guess emotionally, when I first started the company was when I had my first experience with female health, which was when I was 9. I had my first period super early, which meant that my parents hadn't had the chance to speak to me about how my body was going to change.
Yeah.
I had absolutely no clue what was happening because I had no, like cultural references or anything like that. So I thought, this just like randomly happens to me at these like random time periods, and it's super painful. There's like weird fluids coming out of me. What do I do? So I kept it a secret for about a year. I didn't feel comfortable sharing it with anyone. I thought that I was being punished by the gods
I
for
want
some.
to hug 9-year-old Valentina. I want to hold her. Oh.
I also had a really, really painful period, and the only thing that helped me was to just soak in my parents' bathtub.
Uh-huh.
I would miss whole days of school because I couldn't physically bring myself to go to school. So that's when I first, emotionally started realizing, okay, there's something quite wrong in the way that we talk about female health, in the way that we experience it. And then later on in 2017, I was doing some research into industrial hemp as a plant, which has a really interesting history. It's very under researched because unfortunately we made it illegal at the same time as marijuana, which meant that even though the plant contains really low levels of THC and it cannot get you high, we completely neglected discovering so many of its interesting properties. But turns out that where I'm from, Bulgaria, northern Bulgaria in particular, had a really big history of growing and exporting industrial hemp. And there was actually even a research institute of industrial hemp in the 30s and 40s. That's how I was able to discover information about the properties of the plant, because it was studied before it was made illegal. And two of the properties of the plant really stuck with me. The first one being that the fibers of it are really absorbent and very environmentally sustainable. So you don't need artificial irrigation, pesticides, herbicides to grow industrial hemp. It's a really environmentally friendly plant. And the extract from the plant has the potential to be pain relieving, as is seen in various different clinical trials. So that's how I had the idea for our first core product, the pain relieving tampon. And as I embarked on a journey of trying to actually manufacture it, I realized how incredibly monopolized tampon manufacturing, but also female health innovation is. You have these large players which very much dominate the space, and their incentives are not always aligned with the interests of the consumer. So that's when they evolved from a tampon company to a female health company that has this bigger agenda.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I have a bunch of questions. That is an amazing story. The first one is, you said you can extract certain compounds from the hemp that are pain relieving. Is that CBD that you're referring to?
Yeah, so we use a combination. We have our own formulation, and it includes CBA, CBG, CBD, and CBN. Cannabinoids have a tendency of working better when they're together. There's something called the entourage effect. So we don't just use pure CBD. We use all of these different cannabinoids together, but it's important to know that we don't have even a trace amount of THC, because we want to be able to offer the product to people who may have various sensitivities or objections to THC.
Yeah. And I'm sure also it, like, legality wise, it makes it kind of easier if you don't have THC in there at all.
We don't have a class 2 drug. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
helpful.
And you said that when you were getting into like the manufacturing of it, supply chain management, I can imagine that you found that things were monopolized. I understand that from like a 30,000-foot view. Could you give us like an example of what you mean by that? Like, what did you experience? What happened?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at tampons, you have one really large European manufacturer that manufactures the tampons for every organic brand, non-organic brand. They're all made on the same machines, using the same materials. So there's very little opportunities for product innovation. And that's a principle that is widely replicated across the whole female health industry. So what is applicable to tampons is also applicable to contraception, is also applicable to vaginal health screening. In contraception, for example, you have two really large name pharmaceutical companies who have, developed the majority of contraception that we use today. And again, the incentives of large corporates are not always aligned with the interests of the consumer.
Mm-hmm. And I don't ever see these big monopolizing, companies saying, "Hey, we're going to decrease your pain." I see a lot of like no leaking. I see a lot of like um mostly that, or like, "Oh, you can exercise in it." And what that makes me think of is like the worst thing that could ever happen to you is that anyone finds out you're on your period, and that's what we prioritize, right? Is like helping you not expose your periodness or making them smaller, right? Like you can hide it even better, feel shamed. We're monetizing your shame. Whereas you were taking more of a like, we're going to show up in your inbox and talk about period poop and what color your discharge is and this, right? Like super upfront and vulnerable. And then also you're prioritizing the pain part, right? The cannabinoid, as you said, entourage cannabinoids of, helping relieve the pain. Did you have to do like clinical trials to prove that it did do that? Can you tell me what that, roadmap looked like?
We did, yeah. We had to do preclinical, clinical, and human trials to ensure not only that the product works, but also that it's safe and that it's safe for long-term use. So we looked at everything from whether it causes irritation to whether it has an impact on fertility, on toxicity, um, your vaginal microbiome as well. So does it change pH levels? Does it change your levels of lactobacilli? And we did a really comprehensive clinical validation to ensure that the products that we're putting out there are safe and effective.
Yeah. And I'm assuming since they're on the market, it proved to be effective and pain reducing and safe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the results from our human trials on efficacy showed that the tampon is on par with traditional painkillers in terms of reducing the volume of pain, but with a quicker onset. So if you typically have to wait 40 to 45 minutes for a painkiller to work, the tampon tends to work in 15 to 20 minutes.
So cool. And was it easy for you to find a lab to collaborate with? Because as a femtech leader, expert, networker, I get asked by a lot of founders that have ideas. Hey, I need to do a trial. Where's a lab I can go to? And I'm like, where are the vagina labs? Like, and also, do they have the bandwidth to let all these other people in who want to test all this stuff in vaginas, which I think is amazing. And I would love to just start a big fat vulva institute where we have all the vaginas and the models and all the things. But in the meantime, what was your experience like? Was it hard or easy to find this partner?
Yeah, it was pretty challenging, especially because for clinical trials, you typically have to pay upfront. You can't just pay monthly.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time when I was first starting the company, I didn't have any outside funding, so I had to use my salary as a subsidy as well as a number of credit cards. So I was really fortunate to find a clinical trial facility which was open to letting me fund the trial in monthly installments on my credit card, which was great. And like we're forever grateful for how they've supported us. But yeah, it's hard to find researchers who feel comfortable with menstruation and who consider period pain a significant enough issue so that it's worth solving. Because you mentioned at the start, a lot of these large tampon brands do not really offer any solutions for period pain. Well, interestingly, in the 1950s, Procter and Gamble were actually looking at creating a pain relieving tampon, but they discontinued it because they thought the market wouldn't be big enough. And then another interesting kind of trivia fact is when Viagra was intended to be a heart medication, but then they realized it has a side effect of giving people boners. Another side effect of Viagra is that it reduces period cramps. So the National Institute for Health in the US was presented with, two research proposals. The first one was, could Viagra support painful menstruation? The second one was, could Viagra support erectile dysfunction? And they decided to fund the erectile dysfunction trials, even though erectile dysfunction affects only 19% of men, whereas period pains affect 90% of women.
Holy crap. All right. So I'm just going to reiterate what you just dropped on us, that they saw two main side effects of Viagra. One was getting an erection in men, and one was period pain reduction in women. One of them needed to get funded. and they went with the erection one, even though 19% of men are affected by it, whereas 90% of women are affected by period pain.
Yeah.
Wow. I don't know why I get surprised. Why do I get surprised? Oh,
We have to, even if you look at ibuprofen prescription guidelines. Wait, do you have that? I think it's Advil in the US.
Uh-huh.
So the initial formulation was only tested on the male physiology because it was only in 1993 that the FDA made it illegal to not include women in your clinical trials. Until then, it was the norm because scientists believed that the menstrual cycle would pollute the data of their study.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the medications that went out on the market before 1993 were actually not tested on the female physiology. And one of these medications is, the common painkiller. So the dose of 250 milligrams, which is the standard dose of a painkiller, was developed based on what works for the male physiology. And for decades, we've known anecdotally that women speak of, taking a whole pill pack of painkillers during their period to deal with the pain. Turns out, for us to experience the effects of the common painkiller, we need a much higher dose, 800 milligrams. So the National Health Service in the UK, only a year ago, changed its prescription guidelines to increase the dose of painkillers for women.
Oh my gosh. So one of the things you said earlier was that when you were trying to find a doctor clinical trial to work with in terms of like getting your tampons tested, one of the issues it sounds like you ran into was having doctors that actually believed that was a problem worth or needing solving. Can you tell me, like, okay, whatever, like men with capital deciding what gets funded, corporations, monetization, like government stuff, but doctors, like physicians, are supposed to be like the one people that are still advocating for uteri, right? Like, so tell me about your experience with the physicians not believing the pain was real.
And I'll caveat that by saying that there are some phenomenal researchers who do really care about female health and are doing some, really phenomenal work.
And we love them too. Yes.
The majority of people that I met along the way in the tampon industry, in the clinical research industry, could just not understand why a tampon needed to be pain relieving when there's painkillers on the market. Like, I got that question so many times. Clinicians, like anyone under the sun. It's like, why would you make this if you can buy painkillers at every pharmacy? I'm like, because they don't work in the same way, and you're not supposed to take painkillers every month for 5 days a month. Like, the actual leaflet within the painkillers packaging says you shouldn't. There are significant consequences to your gut microbiome, your stomach lining, etc. So yeah, unfortunately, I think physicians, they love solving these like grand, super complicated challenges, like, uterine cancer or ovarian cancer or like other big complications. But things like, finding the right contraception or getting an HPV screen or, period pain, they're considered minutia, these like general elements of the female health experience women should just put up with, and there's no reason to innovate on them or improve them. I mean, look at the speculum. The speculum is a device that is used to open the vaginal canal during labor to help the baby pass through the vaginal canal. It has literally not changed in design since it was first invented.
Which is like almost 100 years ago, at least, I think.
200.
Yeah. 200?
Yeah, it was used in Britain really early on.
Oh my gosh. Insane. And so, so there are doctors that care. And so you go through these clinical trials. You get these great results. You're funding it via your credit card. Go you. That is the hustle factor, After that, like, I want to know about, like, did you eventually fundraise? And then what, you went to market, like, are women buying these like crazy, or how's that going?
Yeah. So I started fundraising in the summer of 2018, and in autumn 2018, we had a round closed. It was just me in the company then. So my first job was to put together a team, start building the brand, start putting manufacturing together, organize our entire supply chain. When I first fundraised in 2018, it was me, a patent application, some early clinical trial results, and some exclusivity agreements in our supply chain, and this big idea for what the company could be. So it was really hard in the early days because I don't have many years of professional experience. I've not managed big teams, not managed big projects, so I had to learn everything from scratch, and it was a very steep learning curve. And where we are right now, so far, so we launched in March 2020 in the United Kingdom, and we've had over 35,000 people use the product. We're currently available in 8 European countries, China, Hong Kong, and then next year we hope to be able to launch in the US as well. We're currently building our waitlist in the US, working on our factory setup, working on our FDA approval. We've submitted all of our documentation to the FDA. Yeah, that's where we are today.
Oh my God, I'm so proud of you. I'm just like this little email subscriber that's like, oh my gosh, like fangirling, first of all, because like I said, I've been reading your blogs for a long time. And then like to hear about your success is just so heartwarming. For the FDA in the United States, do you have to redo your clinical trial?
No, the clinical trials that we did in Europe were in FDA regulated clinical trial facilities. That said,
Girl, that's awesome. That's good. Yeah.
we are considering doing clinical trial in the US as well. We think the FDA has a preference towards US based clinical data, so we think that might help. So we are considering that.
Yeah. Woo. You are like amazing. What are some of the future are there other product lines or are other offerings that Daye is gonna offer?
Yeah, I mean the naked tampon that we have, it's the most absorbent organic tampon on the market. It's also significantly more sustainable than other tampons that are out there. The applicator is made of sugarcane, which is renewable and bio-based. The wrapper is water soluble, so you can just flush it down the toilet after you finish changing your tampon. And the design of the tampon is different as well. So we have a feature called the protective sleeve, which covers the tampon, and it ensures that there is no fiber loss from inserting and removing the tampon vaginally, which is an issue that many people have not heard about at all, but it's actually significantly more prevalent than toxic shock syndrome. Basically, every tampon sheds fiber because of a design flaw. And when you use multiple tampons during your menstrual cycle, that fiber builds up and it slowly becomes a perfect breeding ground for bacteria, increasing the risk of infections, which is, again, anecdotally, we know that a lot of women get BV or candida or thrush at the end of their menstrual cycle after using tampons. And then another feature that we have on the naked tampon, you'd think this is the standard in tampon manufacturing. Unfortunately, it's not. You'd be surprised to hear there's no mandatory tampon manufacturing step. Tampon sterilization step in the manufacturing process. So yeah, I'll just let that sink in.
Yeah. They're like, yeah, just like make it, wrap it up, send it out, put it in vaginas. Like no need to sterilize it beforehand, even though we made you become a class 2 med device.
Yeah, I'll get to that point as well, but in Europe, plasters and hand sanitizers are significantly more regulated than tampons. In the US, you only have to show the FDA your microbiological results once, and that's it. That's what you need to get clearance for a class 2 medical device. That's a tampon in the US.
Wow.
You don't, and obviously, like, if just because you have clean microbiology once doesn't mean that your production process is set up in a way where you're continuously going to have clean microbiology results. So we use a process called gamma ray sterilization, which pierces through the packaging, it pierces through to the core of the tampon, and it sterilizes the entire final product so that when you open a Daye tampon, it's completely free from pathogens, bacteria, and also from staph and strep, which are the causes of toxic shock syndrome.
Seriously, these are all like Are your tampons really expensive because it has all these amazing things on it?
They're more expensive than Tampax, but we're on par with other organic tampon brands.
Cool. Cool. Woo. You are so like my mind is blown. You make me I talk about this a lot on the podcast that I'm on a birth control that lets me skip my period. When I interview people like you, I'm like, maybe I want my period back because I want to use this. I'm like, wait, what am I doing? Why would I say that? But really, I'm like, I want to try it. This is so awesome. What are some of your, future goals for the company? So you said, obviously expansion. Is there other product lines or like what else do you envision? You've come so far already.
Thank you. Well, we want to become gynecology as a service. So we want to build a platform that delivers on every layer of the female health experience in a really comprehensive way. And why we believe it's important to have one place where you go for all of your female health needs is we have this fundamental belief that for female health to be done right, you have to look at everything holistically. So
Mhm.
if you change your contraception, that will impact your vaginal microbiome, which will then impact your ability to conceive, et cetera, et cetera. It's like all interconnected links that are frequently neglected because you have one provider for X, another provider for Y, and you never end up being in control of your own health record. You never own your own health record. You never interact with it in the way that you could if it was all stored in one platform where different elements of your female health journey could speak to each other and educate each other in order to produce the best possible outcome.
Mhm. 100%. Wow. Well, I hope that you can do that. Like that would be super awesome because there are so many different elements moving around. Yeah. We have two last questions for you that our listeners really love, and I'm so excited to get your input on it. The first one is we have a lot of aspiring femtech founders. So, what is an area in women's health and wellness that still needs innovating?
Ooh, what is not an area in female health that needs innovating? Um, if I had to choose one thing in particular, I'd say the vaginal microbiome is a really interesting area of female health that's very underexplored.
Mhm.
There's a really interesting study that came out of Harvard Medical School. They monitored 800 mothers and their children, and they measured the health of their vaginal microbiome at the before the pregnancy, at the start of the pregnancy, during the pregnancy, and then after birth. And they could show a clear correlation between a mother having a healthy vaginal microbiome and her pregnancy outcomes. So her risk to preterm birth, but also, even more shockingly, there's a direct correlation between having a healthy vaginal microbiome and your child's motor skills and IQ levels. Yeah, every time I think of that study, I have this like overwhelming thought, which is we're so quick to be so self-congratulatory. When something good happens in our lives, we achieve a goal, you know, we're successful, and it all could be related to your mother's vaginal microbiome health when she was which you had no way to control, no way to measure, absolutely no understanding of. So I think the vaginal microbiome is a really interesting area of research.
That reminds me of our tagline, which is women's health is everyone's health.
Yeah, I love that.
Because it comes right from the vagina. Like we are affecting everything. Do you
Yeah,
know if in that study it was vaginal birth or they had C-sections as well?
it was vaginal birth. Yeah,
Vaginal birth, yeah.
that's when you do the transfer from the vaginal microbiome into the gut microbiome of the child through the
Mhm.
nose and the mouth.
It's inoculation at its finest.
Yeah.
Whoa, crazy. All right. So, listeners, vaginal microbiome, we have definitely talked about it before on the show. But here's just another case study about like, it's not just about women feeling good, smelling good, like feeling healthy. It's also about the IQ potentially in the motor skills of your babies. Like, really, really influential here, y'all. Really influential. Our last question is what do you think the femtech industry as a whole needs the most right now in order to be successful?
Funding.
Funding. Yeah. Tell me about your experience with funding. Like, were people like weird? Well, you said like Advil exists. Why do they need this? Like, but what else did you kind of encounter?
people were weird and uncomfortable, and there were the rare occasions when people were great and understanding, but most of the time it was, and it continues to be pretty strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you have to
That
go to a room full of like 50, 60-year-old men, and you have to talk about the vaginal canal and menstrual blood leaks, and they're just so uncomfortable. Like you can see how they can't wait to like hide under the table or like get you out the door. So I know I have like 15 minutes before they start and
wow.
throw me out. So I know I have like 15 minutes to really grab their attention.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we at Femtech Focus are hoping to change that game and show these men the data and say, get over your uncomfortableness. Because, by the way, this is what your wife is dealing with, your daughters are dealing with, your sister is dealing with. And by the way, look at the numbers. Like, if you want to do your job well and like make a lot of money for either yourself and or your investors, like just get over it and put money down, because like the market sizes are huge. The fact that you said 35,000 women, is it 35,000 women or tampons have been sold?
35,000 women.
Women in
Yeah.
under a year during a mother effing pandemic. Like that, that's like, that's the clubhouse of tampons, like that's what that is, like startups don't typically do that well, especially not this year in a pandemic. So, most startups don't have a founder that's willing to pay for clinical trials on their credit card. We are the hustlers of entrepreneurs. We are the collaborators. We're the pioneers. We're building what women have needed for a really long time.
Another sad thing that I've noticed is there's now more and more female investors, but I think because of how toxic the environment in venture capital often is, they're worried that if they support a female founder or a female focused business, they're going to be pigeonholed as like the girly investor that invests in girly things. So I've actually had experiences where female investors have like resisted meeting me even more than male investors, because the industry is positioned in such a way where they don't feel comfortable being positioned and pigeonholed as someone that only focuses on femtech because they're a woman.
You know what this reminds me of is the scientific advisors I had in my early scientific career. If they were a woman over 50, they were usually a bitch, honestly, like 9 times out of 10. And I would ask my, female colleagues like in the lab, like, why are they all the worst? Like, does science ruin us? And, when we thought about it, it was like, no, because when they were grad students, they were the only woman in the program. They were the only woman who got a faculty position. They were the only woman. And so it was like fight, 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 fight for it. Right. And they got this huge armor and like intensity. And this is like, I'm not trying to generalize for all women in science over 50, but that's been my experience. I feel like right now we have something stupid, like only 6% of VC decision makers are women. And so maybe they feel they have this like intense, like, oh, I have to prove, like there's no room for error, like, well, hopefully. And like, I mean, I really hope I get to snap my fingers, but let's say in 20 years, like it'll start changing. But yeah, I totally feel you though. I personally don't even want to be that like angry feminist investor, right? And I even tell people, I'm like, hey, our podcast is not like angry. We don't like say like men are the worst, like vaginas are the best, like women only. I'm like, no, men, come, like, and this is going to be informational and inspirational and data driven, because I'm like, doing the angry thing doesn't really inspire. Do you agree?
Oh, 100%, 100%. But I can also understand where that anger is coming from. And
Mm-hmm.
said it so well yourself. If you've constantly been attacked and slapped across the face, you are going to develop a really strong armor. And it's really sad that this is the way that it is right now for women in venture capital. It is really hard, and they do probably feel like they have to prove themselves more than any other man. And like maybe what I'd like to end on is like, let women fail. Like let women fail in the same way that you let men fail. So many of my conversations with other female founders, especially if they're of diverse backgrounds, are often about, I have all of this pressure to not fail, because if I fail, then the people who have looked up to me, like the younger generation or girls or other women of color or like other Eastern European women, they'll think to themselves, oh, well, she failed and she had raised all of this money and she was really smart and she was working really hard. So why should I even try? And that's so much pressure to live and exist under. Like, just let women fail.
Yes. And if you, listener, are someone who is a woman who failed, don't shy away from that. Like my first startup was a DNA based dating app. And I've got to tell you, I've had some feelings the last 2 weeks with Bumble going IPO. Like, oh, what if I did this differently? What if I did that differently? Everyone's posting like, she's such an inspiration. And I'm like, I'm such a failure. But it's like, no, she is it's a unicorn, quite literally, in terms of like how rare it is. Like, if I actually want to influence more women, I should be more open about why and how mine did not succeed, because a lot more women will relate to that, right? Rather than being IPO'd Whitney Wolf, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I have one last fun question for you. Does your family still live in Bulgaria?
Yes, everyone still lives in Bulgaria.
And what is their experience, like opinion about your company? I love to hear different cultural insights.
I don't think anyone in my family has like any clue about what I'm doing. It's just like such a weird concept, because venture capital, it's big in London and like somewhat big in like Germany and France.
Mhm.
But still, it's like a very small niche group of people that deal in venture capital and startups. So my family is just like, someone gave you money for your idea? What is this Ponzi scheme?
And what do they feel about you're in the menstruation hemp business?
Yeah, no, they're really supportive. It was actually really funny because my mother, when I was growing up, was always like, "Don't you dare use tampons! Tampons are disgusting." And I was so afraid to tell her that I was working on a tampon company. And this is me, like 22, 23 years old, right? Like not a baby. And I only told her that I was working on the company when I raised the first round. I didn't tell her.
Wow.
I was actually really surprised because now she's like super supportive. She uses the product. She always gives me feedback. Yeah.
Isn't it crazy? You get into femtech, you learn about your mom's vagina. I
Yeah.
now know about my mom's stuff, and I'm like, maybe I didn't need to know that, mom. But yes, I support you.
Like super masculine, like tough guy brothers, and and now all of them are like, oh, well, how's it going with the tampons? We're so proud.
Oh
We're
my
telling
God.
our friends that you built this new product.
I love that. I love that. Valentina, you are so fun to chat with. I am so glad I finally got to meet you and interview you. You are an inspiration and can't wait to see your product in the US.
Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful being on your platform, and I can't say thank you enough for hosting the conversations that you host and doing the work that you do.